With the draft quickly approaching, we are talking cornerbacks this week on the Wandering Buffalo podcast. Get your hands on stylish t-shirts, hoodies, and more at wearbuff.com. That's wearbuf.com. And make sure to use the promo code TWB at checkout for 20% off your first order. Stay Buffalo proud with Wear Buff.
You're now listening to the Wandering Buffalo podcast with your host, Justin Goddard.
Bills Mafia, welcome into another episode of the Wandering Buffalo podcast, a show on the Buffalo Fanbase Podcast Network. My name is Justin, and I am your host. Today we are talking cornerbacks, and if you've been listening to the show at all throughout this, as we get ready for the draft cycle, I have my doubts that cornerback is a position that the Bills are looking at least in the first round. It is a very obvious gaping need on this roster. At the cornerback 2 position, obviously just locked up Christian Benford as CB1. But I've talked on previous episodes just kind of about the track record of McDermott and Beane, not only with the Bills, but going back to their time in Carolina, of just how they're able to have get-by guys and, take late-round picks and undrafted guys and aging veterans. And they're able to use players like that to get them through a season at the cornerback 2 spot, particularly when you have a stud on the opposite side of them. And we've seen that happen recently in terms of Dane Jackson and Levi Wallace, and we know all the names, right? And so to me, I don't see the first round pick being a cornerback 2. But if you've been listening to the show for any amount of time, you know that I am often wrong about things. And with it being a screaming need, and don't get me wrong, I'm not opposed to this idea. I'm just operating predictively on whether or not I think Brandon Beane will go that route. For me, I think it makes a ton of sense for a lot of reasons, in that you just locked up Christian Benford. Your hope, if you're taking a guy early, is, you're going to hit on another stud, and you can have your cost-controlled cornerback 1 and cornerback 2 for the next 5 years and not really have to think about it. And for that reason, I think that makes a ton of sense for me. I would still prioritize the defensive line over cornerback, at least in terms of first round. And this is all kind of approaching it from a vacuum, right? You're looking at the board and every player that you wanted is still there. It's not really how the draft works, especially when you're talking drafting at the tail end of the board. And, who knows how it all shakes out on draft night. Could be, the Bills' dream scenario is that they take a defensive tackle in round 1 and that's their top priority. But there's a run of 5 guys that go right before they're about to pick, and their top-rated player on their board is the cornerback, so they pivot and address defensive tackle in the second round, whatever the case is. But I do think it's worth talking about, and I think there is a very realistic chance that cornerback is in play in the tail end of the first round. So I have 4 guys I want to talk about today. Just brief little scouting reports. Technically 5, because if we're talking cornerbacks, we got to talk Travis Hunter, right? And I'll just throw him in the mix because we're talking cornerbacks. But I mean, ultimately, there's no shot that he ends up on the Bills, unless you want to trade away, basically every draft pick for this year, maybe like half this draft and half of next year's draft to get up. He's a player that's going to go in the top 5, and I feel very confident about that, even if we have a situation where two quarterbacks go, the top two picks, and you push Abdul Carter down the board, and that's your top three. It's pretty easy to get to Travis Hunter going in the top five. Obviously, that generational type talent. You see him playing on both sides of the ball and excelling on both sides of the ball as a cornerback and a receiver. He'd be awesome for any team to add. He wants to play both positions at the pro level. It's a pipe dream. It's not happening. Our next guy is Will Johnson out of Michigan. He comes in at 6'2", 194 pounds. Projected to go in the first half of the first round. I have seen some discourse out there about some concerns about his game, and maybe we see him slide down a little bit. I think that this is a prospect that, unless the Bills are in love with him and they're willing to get up in the first round a little bit, I think this one is another kind of far-fetched idea. Something working for the Bills, if this is a target that they had in mind, is his 2023 tape was better than his 2024 tape. And in fairness, he dealt with a lot of injuries in 2024. There's a turf toe in there. And, it's a matter of, for me, that kind of becomes like more of a risk assessment of, are these kind of one-off injuries? Is this something that we have to worry about at the next level? Like I said, I think it's kind of a little bit of a moot point unless you think the Bills are going to trade up for a corner, which I see is pretty unlikely, but who knows? Big knocks on Will Johnson is he tends to allow a little bit more separation than you'd like to see. He kind of relies on his athleticism to be able to catch up and make a play. He's a bit of a gambler, which for me, it's not something that is like a deal breaker for me. I think from the Bills' perspective, they want everybody doing their job. You keep the ball in front of you, you come up and tackle. You don't allow the big plays. And especially with the changes at safety, I think there's less of an appetite to have a guy out there gambling on things and giving up big plays. For me, I'm fine with a bit of a gamble. You got Josh Allen on the other side of the ball. You have an offense that was kind of pieced together with Stephon Diggs leaving, and you scored the most points in the most touchdowns in franchise history. I'm good with taking some risk, get the ball back in Josh Allen's hands. You're going to have some negative plays off of it. Is what it is to me. The next guy here is kind of my dream scenario, and I think a lot of it lines up to make a ton of sense in that it could work out for the Bills doing like a stick and pick at 30. When I say dream scenario, it's with the asterisk that my dream scenario is defensive tackle in the first round. It's Kenneth Grant. But if we're talking cornerback in the first round, my dream scenario is Savion Riley. And first of all, I'm told that's how his name is pronounced from people a lot smarter than me. I've been saying Savion Riley for a long time. Apparently it's Savion Riley. But he's out of ECU. Projected to go late first, early second. Comes in at 6'3", 194, and has a nice blend of size and athleticism. And part of why this is a dream scenario for me is I think beyond Travis Hunter, there's a good chance that Revel would have been, your number 2 cornerback in this year's draft. But he had the unfortunate ACL injury in September, and I did see today that there's going to be a recheck on his medicals, but it's not ideal to have your rookie first round pick that you the whole fan base is excited for, you as an organization are excited for. And the rookie year, at least to some extent, is going to be affected by that injury. But for me, and this is a difficult opinion to have in some circles, because I've had a lot of conversations about the Bills need to get rookies in the building that can start and make impact and all that conversation. And, you're running the risk of drafting a guy who might not be ready for the start of the season. For me, I think this is the type of swing that you take the risk on, knowing that at 30, you could get a guy that should be drafted in the top 15 that's falling because of injury. And is it a bit of a luxury pick? Is it a bit of a gamble? Sure. But you also have the infrastructure in place to be able to get by. And, if he's able to come back from that injury and hit his ceiling and be the player that, he was in college before the injury, you got an absolute steal at pick 30. And as far as the rookie year comes in, I'm not all that concerned about it. It's a glaring hole right now, but we also have until August, September for Brandon Beane to get the roster set. There's still guys floating out there in free agency. If you were able to go this kind of path, and who knows, maybe these conversations already exist. If you were to give Rasul Douglas a call while he's still sitting out there and like, hey man, we got a starting job for you, and hopefully at some point this guy takes the job for you, but we'll give you a 1-year contract. Come on in. He's floating out there and he's not either not getting offers or not getting the offers that he wants. What does it cost to bring him back for 1 more year? There's guys still floating out there if you have an appetite for maybe a little bit of a bigger contract. Asante Samuel Jr. still floating around out there. There's some guys that could be get-by guys for part of the season while Revel comes along and gets in game form. Hell, I don't want to see it be the plan, but Dane Jackson has played meaningful, very meaningful snaps as your CB2 in this system. If that's your absolute floor while you wait for this guy to be ready, it's not something that I'm going to be horribly pressed about. Couple things on Savion Riley. Mentioned his size coming in at 6'3", almost 200 pounds. He's great in press man, and he's a physical corner. He's a sure tackler, and it just kind of all adds up to things that I think the Bills covet in cornerbacks. Moving on, we have my last 2 players here, and these are going to be my speed guys. And the first one being Max Hairston out of Kentucky. And a little bit smaller on this guy, but still a pretty big in terms of cornerbacks, coming in at 6'1", 186 pounds. And dude's a ball hawk. He excels in press coverage as well. I'm kind of trying to highlight some people that have the man coverage skills, because I don't think the Bills are going to just straight up abandon zone. It's just not what happens in the NFL. It's not in their DNA. But when you look at some of the coaching staff moves that they've made, they've brought in guys with man coverage background. I do think we're going to see a lot more man than we're used to. And I think you want to plan for having guys in the building that can excel at that. And I know for me personally, there's a little bit of the trauma from the last guy that we drafted that was a super athletic man coverage guy that just didn't work out. But I don't think that precludes you from taking another swing at it and seeing how it goes. What Hairston really brings to the table for me is something that I feel like we've been really lacking on the back end of this defense. And don't get me wrong, we've had really good defenses, you know, playing in the scheme. You don't have to have the freak athletes. Everybody does their job, and things have worked out great in that system. I have always wanted a little bit more speed on the back end, and Harrison ran a 4.28 40. He's got the athleticism, a guy that's on my radar. And the last one we're going to talk about today is Trey Amos out of Ole Miss. And a lot of things very similar for me with Hairston in the size, coming in at 6'1", a little bit more weight on him, coming in at 195. Both of them projected to be late first round picks, early second round picks. Amos ran a 4.33 40. And the one thing that I have seen a lot about with Trey Amos that kind of makes me a little bit leery as far as him being an option for the Bills is that he has some suspect tackling. And it's just a really difficult thing for me to overlook with how the Bills want to play defense with, you know, every time you hear Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott talking about cornerback plays, they want a guy that can tackle. I talked earlier about a large part of the Bills being in zone is keeping everything in front of you. And, you know, in particular, we've seen a ton of, with our cornerback twos, getting targeted a lot because we have a nice shutdown corner on the other side of the field. You need to have the ability to weather the storm, know that you're going to get targeted a lot. You're going to allow completions. You got to come up and make the tackle. So Amos leaves me a little concerned as far as a Bills specific fit from that perspective. The one thing that I will say about really all of the prospects that I've talked about outside of Will Johnson is I think there's room for several different players that could be fits for the Bills. And in a draft where we want to see some big impact players on the defense, we need some big impact players on the defense. I think it's much more likely that Brandon Beane would be moving up. We know Brandon Beane likes to move up to get his guys. But in the case of Revel and Hairston and Amos, I think there's a chance that they are available early in the second round. And, you know, being at pick 30, we're, you know, starting to see the rumor mill churn up some momentum for Jackson Dart maybe going in the first round. Saw today Jalen Milroe being invited to the combine, which might seem kind of like a one-off, no big deal, but they're trying to get more selective about players invited to the combine. Him being invited to the combine gives me it tells me something that there's interest from teams out there about maybe getting back into the first round to take a quarterback. And the Bills sitting at pick 30 is kind of a beautiful spot to hold that pick. And if somebody wants to come back into the first round to get a dart throw at a quarterback to be able to have that fifth-year option, is it a year where we could see Brandon Beane trading back? Maybe. It always makes the first night of the draft so much more difficult when you stay up for 29 picks, all excited for who the Bills are going to take. You love some guys on the board, and Brandon Beane drops out of the first round. It's challenging. But I think in a year where there's a lot of depth between edge, defensive tackle, cornerback to a certain extent, I think rounds 2, 3, 4, kind of the sweet spot of this draft. And you don't currently have a third round pick. maybe you can drop down 10 spots, draft early second round, still get the guy that you want, and add a third round pick. Like I said, I think it's more likely that maybe a defensive tackle, maybe an edge is sitting there and Brandon Beane gets a little antsy and doesn't think they're making it to 30. I think it's a much more likely scenario that he goes up to get a guy than falling back into the second round. But you never know. Weird things happen on draft night. So I think there is a world where we could see a trade back. We got a couple more weeks left until the draft. Next week, we're going to get down on some edge prospects. We're going to stay focusing on kind of the top end of the draft. Players that we think might land in the first or second round. When you get beyond that, it's really hard to be predictive on who might be there, who won't be there, what kind of trades might happen, all that. So we're going to take a look at some of the edge guys at the top end of the draft. And we're going to see if we got time to do, another position group or two, thinking maybe wide receiver. I think that's still kind of a sneaky long-term need for the Bills. We'll see how it all shakes out. But leading up to the draft, we're going to be here every week. Make sure you're subscribed so you're not missing any episodes. If you could do us a favor, like, share, drop a comment. These episodes are great to drop some comments on which of these players you think would be a great fit, which one you wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. Give us some feedback on players that you like that I haven't talked about. Do all the things. Appreciate you tuning in to this week's episode, and we'll see you next week. Until then, and as always, go Bills.